Hi everyone, welcome back to Story of the World Chapter Highlights. I'm Sophie Teacher and this is chapter 20 of your Story of the World 4 books. Now there is a lot to go over today. So the first part we're going to talk about takes place in Mexico, and the second part is going to delve into World War One, the beginnings of World War One and what was happening there. So let's get started. So very first part today, okay? Like I said, we are in Mexico. Now, at the time in Mexico, so this is the 1900s, you had Porfirio Díaz. Now, Porfirio Díaz had been the president of Mexico for 30 years. Now, he'd been telling people, I'm just so popular, okay? I keep getting voted in. But if you remember, we've learned before that Mexico had a constitution. A president shouldn't have been president for that long. Okay, but he kept doing it again and again and again, and he kept saying how popular he was. But what was really happening is that anyone who disagreed with him, he would send his generals and the people who followed him, and they would go to the person and they would threaten them. Okay, so it was either you vote for me or you die. That was his motto. Okay, so yeah, that's how he'd been in power for so long. Now, Porfirio Diaz gave lots of powerful men, it's kind of like noblemen we've talked about before. So rich, powerful men, lots of power. Okay. Most of these men at the time were making the decisions in Mexico. They were more like Europeans. They talked more like Spanish people. They had more the style of the Spanish. People started to think they're not acting like Mexicans anymore. Okay. They had very modern farms with modern irrigation systems and, used very like new technology at the time. And also, they were making a lot of food. Now, at this time in Mexico, this man was taking a lot of the food from the poor Mexicans, okay? And, at this time, people were starting to starve. And these powerful men, they weren't sharing this food with the people who were starving in Mexico. They were sending it to other countries and making lots of money. So people started to get really angry. Now, in 1910, so around 10 years later, okay, up until this point, Diaz had not let anyone run against him in an election. But he thought, I'm going to prove to people that people really love me. So there was this man, Francisco Madero. Now, Francisco Madero was a very rich man, but he was known to treat his workers very kindly. He was super kind to them. And for the first time, Diaz let Madero run against him in an election. He thought, I've got this. It's going to be so easy. But unfortunately for him, people were growing tired of him. People were done with Diaz, okay? People were starting to starve and they were miserable. And they thought, maybe Madero can save us from this fate. So Diaz watched as Madero got more and more popular and started getting more and more votes. And he decided, I can't take the risk anymore. And he put Madero in jail. He went, no more. We're not going to do this anymore. And he put him in jail. Now, lots of different things were happening at this time. And thankfully for Madero, he managed to escape jail and he ran over the border into the United States and to Texas. Now, later in Texas, so in Texas at this time, there was a lot of people who were mad at the Mexican government. They weren't happy with what was happening. And they started being like guerrilla fighters. They were fighting against the government and, they weren't very happy. So Madero went to one of these men, Doroteo Arango, who was a guerrilla fighter and had lots of men who followed him and respected him, and said, please come help me. Please come back to Mexico with me and we can fight Diaz. So that's what they did, okay? Him and 300 of his men went back to Mexico. Now, at this time, Diaz had started to grow sick. And as more and more of the rebels started to surround his home, he came out and he signed a treaty. And the treaty let him live, let him leave Mexico and go to France, okay? But it would put Madero into his place as president. So that's what he did. So Diaz left, went to France, and a few years later, he ended up dying in France. Now, Madero tried his best to fix what was happening in Mexico. But it was hard. All of these rebel leaders who'd come with him all disagreed and all wanted different things. So for 2 years, he tried and tried and tried. And unfortunately, February 1913, this led to the 10 tragic days. Lots of people were killed in Mexico because of rebellions and fights that were happening. And during this time, Doroteo Arango killed Madero. And Madero was killed in fighting. And after this, there was more and more fights, again and again and again. And, people coming into power, people leaving power. And for 30 years, Mexico was in this state of fighting. Okay? All right, so let's move on to World War I. Now, this is lots of information. So I really want you to try and remember the key facts. So definitely make notes for this chapter because it's a world war. There's lots going on. So one of the most important things I want you to remember is kind of, I guess, the way historians or the way we're told the fighting started. Now, this is, if you remember from the Balkans, Serbia hated Bulgaria. They were really mad at Bulgaria. Now, at this time, Bulgaria had made a friendship with Austria, which meant Serbia now hated Austria. If you're friends with our enemy, you're our enemy now. Okay, so Serbia had hated Bulgaria. Bulgaria made friends with Austria. So Serbia hated Austria now. Now, you might not think this is an issue, but unfortunately, this led to one of the big moments that started what was happening in World War I. So a Serbian by the name of Gavrilo Princip, he and his friends had decided they were going to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the Austrian throne. He was the heir to the throne. Now, Gavrilo and his friends actually attempted this, and it didn't go very well. They threw a bomb, people were screaming, it didn't hit the Archduke, and the Archduke and his wife actually got away. And Gavrilo thought, we failed in our attempt. But actually, later on, as he was walking down another street, to his luck, the Archduke and his wife went past in their motor car. And Gavrilo had a gun and he shot the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And this is what started World War I. Now, it's important to remember at this time, this is going to be important to note down, that there were lots of other issues happening in Europe. And lots of historians actually say that this bullet just tipped things over the edge. Everyone was ready to fight. So here we have all of the different things that happened in order. So the first thing was, after this happened, the Austrian government had said, I bet it was the Serbian government who planned this. I bet it was them. It was really just rebel fighters, but Austria said, no, it must be the government. So the first thing that happened was Austria, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, declared war on Serbia. They said, we're going to fight Serbia. You can't just come into our country and kill the heir to our throne. That will not happen. Now, at this time, Serbia's ally was Russia. So Russia immediately leapt in and said, okay, we're declaring war on Austria. So that was the second part to happen. So first, Austria declares war on Serbia. Serbia's ally, Russia, declares war on Austria. Now, at this point, the third point, Germany is an ally of Austria. So let's remember all those. We're going to help a little at the bottom too, but let's remember whose side was on each side. Who were allies of who? That's really important. Definitely talking about these big wars like World War I and World War II. Now, Germany declared war on Russia and France. Germany was just ready to fight France as well. Like I said, there was lots of little issues that had been building up in Europe. And as you know from the book, European countries have fought many, many times. And this was kind of what was happening again. It built up to this point where everyone was ready to fight again. So Germany declared war on Russia, because they declared war on Austria and France. Now, at this time, Germany decided they were going to march into France and start their fighting. And between Germany and France is Belgium. Belgium didn't want to be involved. They said, this isn't our problem. But Germany decided to march through Belgium, even though they said they weren't going to be part of this war. And from across the English Channel, Great Britain were watching, and they weren't very happy. They thought, if Germany becomes more powerful, they might take over the whole of Europe. So Great Britain got involved, and they declared war on Germany for this. So this is really important to remember. You have Central Powers and Allied Powers, the Allied forces. Central Powers were Austro-Hungarian Empire, so Austria, Bulgaria, Germany, and the Ottoman Turks. And the Allied forces were the other side. So Great Britain, France, Russia, China, Greece, Japan, Serbia, and many other countries joined them. So this is really important to remember because something similar might come up again when we talk about World War II. Now, as all this fighting was happening, we go on to May 7th, 1915. So we're 1 year into World War I. Now, there was this ship, the Lusitania, okay, which was a British ship, and it was making a voyage from New York to Liverpool. It was full of passengers, civilians. They weren't part of the war. But a German torpedo shot from a submarine was shot at the ship and sunk the ship, and 1,200 people died. Now, this made especially everyone angry, but especially America. There was lots of Americans on board. It was going from New York to Liverpool, and this was the first point that really angered America. Now, at this point in England, there was lots of things happening. By winter 1916, they'd started a draft. A draft is similar to what happens in Korea, and it says all men have to serve in the military. But at this point, they were at war, so they had to join and they had to be part of the war. It was most men between the ages of 18 and 41. There were some exceptions if a man was a widower, so if he didn't have a wife and children, he could stay, teachers, and there were a few other things like medical cases and stuff. Now, because all of these men had went to war, by 1918 in Great Britain, there was 1 million women who were working in the workforce and were part of the production. Okay, so they made weapons and things and bullets for the war. Now, 3 years later, already at this point, America had been angry. But 3 years later, Germany decided they wanted to get Mexico on their side. They wanted to take down the US before the US got too involved. So Germany sent a coded message to Mexico, and under the code, it said, join us. If you join us, we can give you some of the land back that the US has taken from you. Now, unfortunately for Germany at this time, there was lots of people, cryptographers in Britain, who are people who work out codes. So the people in Britain at this time were figuring out this code, and they got it. They got it before the Mexicans could have replied to the letter. And immediately, Great Britain, being an ally of America, sent it to the US. And they sent the letter saying this is what was happening. Now, this made Americans so angry. It even got published in a newspaper. And it made them so angry that they thought, we can't let Germany do this anymore. So on April 6, 1917, America joined the war. Okay, they joined the war against Germany and the other forces. Okay, all right, well done, everyone.